A lot of players spend weeks grinding 1v1s to improve their muscle memory and play faster. They watch all of the SteelSpeaks videos to learn strong builds on every map, but they never stop to think, is there something I'm doing wrong? Knowing build orders and playing fast is great, but I've met too many people who don't even realize what the strengths and weaknesses of each faction are. Sit down an aspiring player and ask them why they choose to play a certain faction. They'll probably talk about how powerful bomb bouncers are, how space temples completely turn a match around, or maybe they're a big fan of AC1Ks. But ask the same question to somebody who spent thousands of hours mastering SC2, and they'll talk about the mobility teleport gives, how effective UEF mobile shields are, the 15% movement speed increase Cybern bots can unlock, or the extra range Illuminate point defenses have over the turrets of other factions. While experimentals are very useful and it is important to know how to use them, on which I've actually made some videos already, all that knowledge is useless if you can't survive long enough to use them. Whether it's 1v1s or team games, you will spend most of your time playing SC2 in the early game. That is why having a good understanding of basic starting units and early upgrades is more important than things like knowing how to correctly micro megaglyphs or fat boys. The most important differences between factions isn't the unlocks they get 20 minutes in, but the arsenal you have readily available from the start. And today I'll be talking about the most important, unavoidable part of each faction. Their starting land units and what comes shortly after. Tanks, bots, mobile artillery, mobile shields, mobile missile launchers, Shotjas, Bodabooms, and more. Even the very first unit your land factories can build should seriously affect your playstyle. UEF starts with Rocket tanks, with an option to unlock Titan bots. But Titans are rarely worth the research and I recommend not building them for reasons I'll explain later. Cybern does not have any tanks as an option, instead they start with Loyalist bots. Illuminate starts with Yenzu tanks with the same stats as UEF rockets, and they have the option to unlock Harvok bots. But unlike UEF Titans that are rarely used, Harvoks can be a very strong choice. The most important thing to take away from all this is that regardless of your faction, your main direct damage dealing unit is either going to be tanks or bots. You should never mix them together, and depending on which one you choose to go for, or even have to go for, your list of objectives is going to look very different in each situation. The differences are simple. Tanks have more health and range, but their movement speed is slower than bots. You'd be surprised how many players don't take advantage of these three very important differences. The health and range advantage tanks have over bots simply means that anytime there's a big fight in one location, the tanks are almost always going to win. While the health is nice, it's actually the extra range that is more of a deciding factor. As long as you keep your distance with tanks and move backwards when the bots try to close the gap, which is called kiting, more of your units will be able to shoot and actually participate in the fight compared to bots. The extra health is also very useful against bombing runs and mobile artillery. This is the first big mistake a lot of people playing bots make. You do not want to engage all of the enemy tanks with all of your bots in one location. As mentioned previously, in this situation tanks are simply better and in a fair fight you'll always lose. So what are you supposed to do with bots? You have to use the movement speed. All those health and range advantages go completely out the window if the tanks can't actually hit their target. In a big engagement, shots that missed one unit are probably going to hit another. But that movement speed difference completely changes the dynamics if there are less targets to hit. Bots also usually shoot a lot more projectiles per second compared to the slow-firing, high-damage projectiles tanks have. The one exception to this is Titans, which is what puts them in a bit of a weird spot. This gives you two options. Either you try to completely walk around the tanks and avoid fighting them, or pick small fights you know benefits the bots. The bots should be the ones deciding where the fight happens. If you see an engagement you don't like, it's not too difficult to just run backwards a bit and try to attack from another angle. Assuming there's no air units, the person with bots is always going to have much better control over the map and the ability to decide where the fights actually happen, since you can just run away if you feel like an engagement is not worth it. The more directions you attack from, the more you're going to split up the enemy army into smaller groups, which again benefits the bots. 2 or 3 bots can easily kill 4 to 5 tanks if you keep zigzagging and changing directions, causing a lot of the tank shots to miss. The high movement speed and faster rate of fire bots have is what forces the player with tanks to defend with slightly more units than they need to and try to use their buildings as shields. That is why in 1v1s against Cybern, pros usually open with one air factory, shutting down these tiny 2 or 3 bot flanking groups all over the map that tanks simply aren't fast enough to deal with. If you're using tanks, it's also important to apply pressure down the middle and avoid being constantly on defense, because if you're just moving your tanks around defending whatever little area you have, the bot player can just gobble up the entire map's resources for himself. As long as you're applying pressure and trying to force the bots out of small engagements, there's only so many flanking groups they can send before they're out of units to defend your main push. As I already mentioned, you can actually use your own buildings and the extra range tanks have to hide behind those buildings, possibly while repairing them if an engineer is close, to avoid keeping too many units on defense. The tanks versus bots 1v1 then becomes this balance of trying to leave as little tanks behind as possible to defend or using bombers, while pressuring the middle with your main army. And as the player with bots, you're trying to flank with as many units as possible and attacking mostly from the sides. This doesn't really apply on very choke-pointy maps, for example Van Horn Core or QIA Labs with only one tight direction of attack. Bots have considerably less space to move around, nullifying their movement speed advantages. That is why on maps like these you either go straight for mobile artillery or go very heavy on research and defend the choke point with turrets until you get experimentals or ACU upgrades to push back. And all this is before you even start considering the different unit upgrades each faction gets. While rockets or loyalists are usually just a temporary phase before switching to mobile artillery and eventually experimentals, Illuminate has no problem building tanks or bots from start to finish. They get access to teleport, allowing their small land units to rival even experimentals, against which rockets would be completely useless, and using loyalists with jump jets versus experimentals is definitely possible, but a lot slower compared to instantly teleporting. Usually getting megalithes is better. If the map is very open and has a lot of ways to flank, you can choose to go bots. If you do go bots, my recommendation would be to only build 20 to 30 in the start and then switch fully to tanks, or in the case of Cybern, mobile artillery or experimentals. But if you unlock jump jets and power detonate, it's actually better to switch back to bots again, because they are the cheapest unit to sacrifice and blow stuff up. Again, I already mentioned this, but do not mix bots and tanks in the start. Your tanks won't be able to keep up with the bots, which nullifies the movement speed if you move them around together. If you only flank using the bots while keeping the tanks back, you're just going to have less units attacking and the tanks will be dead weight. And if you try pushing down the middle with all units, why not just go full tanks if that's the unit that type of engagement benefits the most? I should also mention that UEF and Illuminate get a very strong plus 15% range upgrade on their land units that should always be your first upgrade. With good micro, it makes the tanks even stronger than they already are. It's also possible to research training if the fight looks like it could have a big impact on the outcome of the match, but usually you should save your research points to tech experimentals or any other useful upgrades like mech guns, allowing you to keep even less tanks on defense against bots. That should be enough to get you through the first few minutes of your average match, but what about things like mobile artillery or mobile shields? After the range upgrade UEF gets comes the Demolisher mobile artillery. The total cost is 6 research points. Cybern does not get a range upgrade for their land units, but your land factories start with the ability to build Bragman mobile artillery without the need to spend any research, and Illuminate does not have any mobile artillery as an option. You should never build mobile artillery in the start unless you're playing on maps with only one choke point. Mobile artillery is very easy to dodge, and if you're only fighting a couple units, you're never going to hit them, especially if they have a high movement speed like bots do. Mobile artillery only starts being useful against armies larger than 20 or 30 units. Similarly to bots versus tanks, shots that miss one unit will just hit another. If you want to know more, I've made an entire video on splash damage where I talk about this. You can slightly improve the effectiveness of mobile artillery by ground firing where you think the enemy units will be instead of relying on their automatic aim, but this is very situational. The units also have to stop moving when ground firing, which makes kiting micro impossible. The next useful asset is mobile shields. UEF has an option to unlock P-shields, which have 600 shield hit points and cost 58 mass. Cybern has an option to unlock adapters, which only have 140 shield hit points and cost 70 mass, but they also have the strongest anti-air in the game and the ability to shoot down missiles. Mobile shields are the most expensive small land units you can make, especially adapters. I recommend you only build adapters if the enemy has bombers or the enemy Illuminate researched the tactical missile launcher, which fires in these obvious bursts of 2 and can be entirely stopped by 2 anti-missile units per defended area. Building adapters for their mobile shield alone when you don't need their anti-air or anti-missile capabilities is a massive waste of research, mass and energy. P-shields on the other hand are quite cheap and have more than 4 times the shield hit points compared to adapters, so they're almost always worth it. This fact, combined with the already mentioned advantages of tanks versus bots, means that UEF can get an absolutely brutal combination of tanks, mobile artillery and mobile shields that dominate big land engagements, forcing Cybern to rely on their movement speed to control where the engagements happen and use abilities like jump jets with power detonate or rush abilities like teleport in the case of Illuminate. Whether you get Demolishers first and then P-shields or P-shields first followed by Demolishers is up to the situation and personal preference. A very important fact is that mobile shields are massive, impossible to miss target, and if your tanks or bots are having trouble getting through, you actually want to build a lot of mobile missile launchers. Mobile missile launchers, often shortened to just MML, deal the most damage out of all small land units. But just like tank projectiles are slower than bot projectiles and mobile artillery shots are even slower, MMLs take this to the extreme by being unable to hit a moving target. Their massive DPS and massive range are only useful against structures or, as I already mentioned, mobile shields. While point defenses can completely stop a land army from advancing, having just 3 or 4 MMLs in your army will chew through the factory shields and quickly kill any buildings blocking your path, including the turrets, which MMLs completely outrange. This is why strictly relying on point defenses to defend against the land army is not a long-term plan and at best buys you some time. Point defenses are more of a support unit that should work together with the land units you already have. Your main focus should always be building land units that can move around, apply pressure, or defend wherever you currently need to defend. Any mass you spend on point defenses could have been land units, which can give your enemy a numbers advantage, forcing you to be even more defensive. That's not very useful when point defenses easily get countered by MMLs, or on most maps the enemy units can just walk around and attack somewhere else. This is especially true in 1v1s where the number one deciding factor is how many mass extractors you can capture. Whoever has more units and micros them better will be able to capture more area, gain more mass, and outproduce their opponent. If your enemy doesn't have enough MMLs, you can actually use point defenses offensively, building them right at the enemy's doorstep to keep denying more area until their buildings start dying to MMLs and they have to retreat. But be careful not to build too many MMLs, as every MML you build could have been a tank, bot, or mobile artillery, and overbuilding missiles could cause you to have not enough direct damage units and lose the land fight. You only want to be adding MMLs into your army if the enemy is using mobile shields or has less land units and is relying too much on defenses like turrets, UEF fortified artillery, or the Illuminate generator lasers. One thing to note is that Cybern MMLs, Cobras, have less range than UEF or Illuminate MMLs with the range upgrades researched, and they also deal way less damage to shields. This makes Cybern very vulnerable to Illuminate point defenses that have slightly more range than Cybern or UEF turrets and have barely less range than Cobras. If you're not careful, your Cobras will get bumped by other units into the turret range, and most Cybern pros usually look for other options like attacking somewhere else, jump jets, recyclers, or megaliths. If your enemy starts with research stations, full air, or just simply sucks at the game, you can slow down or completely stop making your direct fire and mobile artillery units to switch fully into MMLs and defensively place turrets. The small amount of bots or tanks you built in the start will make enough of a difference to win an AC 1v1, and since they have little or no land factories, they won't really have a way to deal with any point defenses you build. If you start with small land units, you should never let your enemy just sit on some research stations and unlock something that makes your small land units obsolete. You have to keep applying pressure from as many directions as you can while expanding and taking as many mass extractors as you can, eventually building your own research stations and hopefully doing enough damage in the start to justify starting small land. On small or very open maps, builds that include one or more research station get easily countered by pros, as the small land units allow you to expand all over the map, keep your enemy contained to a small area, and easily catch up in research with a superior economy. It's important to remember that small land units are only useful for so long, and after 10 or 15 minutes you must have new plans to deal with things like experimental units. But without small land units in the start, you're going to lose before ever having a chance to research those experimentals. But there are exceptions. On most maps, you should always start with some small land units, but in team games and choke pointing maps, you can actually get away with 3 research stations and 0 land factories, because by the time the enemy small land units reach your base, you will already be minutes away from experimentals, and point defenses can easily stall for that last minute or 2. Before I end the video, I have to mention 2 weird exclusive small land units Illuminate can unlock. I'm talking about the Shotja sniper bots and the Bodaboom armor booster. Shotjas are interesting because they have massive burst damage and even outrange mobile artillery, but can't move around while firing. Shotjas can only shoot where they're currently pointing, so they can only fire while standing still or moving forward. They also move slower than tanks and take a long time to rotate. This goes directly against what you would ideally like to be doing with the Shotjas, which is abusing their superior range and kiting like you would with mobile artillery. Their health is also very low, so ideally you want to keep your distance from the enemy units and probably completely avoid building them if the enemy has bombers. All of this combined forces some unique micro you don't see with other units. They can be quite useful on very small maps and maps that have water or hills you can hide them on. You're delaying teleport by only 2 research points, and you can either mix a couple of them in your army or go full Shotja from the start. If you're mixing them into your army, you don't have to worry about microing them too much. But if you go full Shotja, the strat is usually to pretend you're playing Total War line infantry, spread the Shotjas into as wide of a line as possible, and don't move them when they're firing. Hopefully the enemy units going from one end to the other will die before they can kill all the Shotjas, and then you can slowly start pushing forward. But this strat is suboptimal above the beginner level, as most players know to eat the first Shotja salvo with structures or their ACU, tech training on their land units, and just walk into melee range, killing all of the Shotjas almost instantly. A cool trick you can do with teleport is let the Shotjas fire and teleport them back before the enemy units can fire. One thing you should never do with Shotjas is A-clicking the ground. While this can be very useful with tanks, the Shotjas behave differently. Instead of shooting from max range like most units do, the Shotjas prefer to just move to whatever you A-clicked instead of actually attacking, usually causing this awkward charge at the enemy, completely nullifying their range advantage. While Shotjas are situational and rarely used, the Bodaboom armor booster is one of Illuminate's most valuable assets and should almost always be used. The Bodaboom armor booster increases the health of all friendly units in its range by 30% and regeneration by 200%. This effect does not stack with more Bodabooms and doesn't affect experimentals or ACUs. What it does however affect are your teammates' units, including air units and naval units. A health difference of 30% in an airfight is absolutely massive and can decide a match if the enemy doesn't build anti-air on the front line to help. The buffs are also incredibly useful against mobile artillery, which is one of Illuminate's big weaknesses. With Illuminate Land, you should always be slowly making your way to teleport, and whether you go for the Bodaboom path or the more expensive Shields path is up to preference. Shields only add around 100 hit points depending on the unit, which can be doubled by the next upgrade. It costs 20 research points to get teleport through the Shields path and 17 research points for the Bodaboom path. But the Bodabooms usually end up helping you and your teammates a lot more, and you also get teleport a few minutes faster. So in most situations, as Illuminate Land, I recommend you get the weapon range upgrade, rush teleport through the top path, get a couple stars, and only then are shields worth it. The only exception where getting teleport through the bottom path is better is if your land units are constantly getting bombed. Some pros like the Bodaboom so much they unlock it even before the weapon range upgrade, but that's again something up to preference. Once you have Bodabooms unlocked, you only need a couple of them. The effect doesn't stack, but having only one in your army makes it an easy target for the enemy. Usually I just select 1 or 2 land factories and put a queue of 2 Bodabooms followed by 5 tanks. You can easily queue up 5 units by holding shift and clicking once. If you can, try to micro the Bodabooms separately and keep them behind all other units. You can have one control group for all your tanks and another control group for MMLs, Bodabooms, and any other units you might have like Shotjas or mobile anti-air. And that was all of the basic units each faction gets. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments or inside the Supreme Commander 2 Discord. Don't forget to check the pinned comment under this video for some interesting 1v1 replays that show a lot of the things I talked about in practice. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Oh yeah, and I have a Patreon now in case you have some disposable income. So yeah, thanks to all these people for supporting the channel. See ya.
What? You still haven't joined the biggest Supreme Commander 2 Discord in the world with over 1,000? 2,000? You have General, Hall of Fame, all the YouTube channels, all the YouTube videos, streaming, don't worry about that. Ask for some help, post some memes, send some replays, find a game, death chat. We even have a channel for all the Xbox Subcom 2 players. So what are you waiting for? Click the first link in the video description or just type Supreme Commander 2 in this thing that nobody will ever use. You should join now!